he makes tools which require much finer manipulation in the making and, of course, in the use. The evolution of the brain, of the hand, of the eyes, of the feet, the whole human frame makes a mosaic of special gifts. Man is not the most majestic of the creatures. Long before the mammals even, the dinosaurs were far more splendid. But he has what no other animal possesses, a jigsaw of faculties which alone, over 3,000 million years of life, make him creative. Every animal leaves traces of what it was. Man alone leaves traces of what he created. But a slow creature like man can stalk, pursue, and corner a savanna animal that is adapted for flight only by cooperation. Hunting requires conscious planning and organization by means of language, as well as special weapons. The hunt is a communal undertaking, of which the climax, but only the climax, is the kill. Hunting cannot support a growing population in one place. The limit for the savanna was not more than 2 people to the square mile. At that density, the total land surface of the Earth could only support the present population of California, about 20 millions, and could not support the population of Great Britain. The choice for the hunters was brutal: starve or move. They moved away over prodigious distances. By 1 million years ago, they were in North Africa. By 700,000 years ago, they were in Java. By 400,000 years ago, they had marched north to China in the east and Europe in the west. These incredible migrations made man, from an early time, a widely dispersed species, even though his total numbers were quite small, perhaps 1 million. What is even more forbidding is that man moved into the north just when the climate there was turning to ice. In that great cold, the ice, as it were, grew out of the ground. The northern climate had been temperate for immemorial ages, literally for several 100 million years. Yet just when Homo erectus settled in China and northern Europe, a sequence of 3 separate ice ages began. The first was at its fiercest when Peking man lived in caves 400,000 years ago. It's no surprise to find fire used in those caves for the first time. The ice moved south and retreated 3 times, and the land changed each time. The ice caps at their largest contained so much of the Earth's water that the level of the sea fell 400 feet. In the second ice age, over 200,000 years ago, Neanderthal man with his big brain became important. The cultures of man that we recognize began to form in the most recent ice age, within the last 100,000 years. That is when we find the elaborated tools that point to sophisticated forms of hunting. The spear thrower, for example, and the baton that may be a straightening tool. The fully barbed harpoon, and of course the flint master tools that were needed to make the hunting tools. Man survived the fierce test of the ice ages because he had the flexibility of mind to recognize inventions and turn them into community property. Evidently, the ice ages worked a profound change in the way man could live. They forced him to depend less on plants and more on animals. The rigors of hunting on the edge of the ice also changed the strategy of hunting. It became less attractive to stalk single animals, however large. The better alternative was to follow herds of animals and not to lose them, to learn to anticipate and in the end to adopt their habits, including their wandering migrations. This is a peculiar adaptation, the transhuman's mode of life on the move. The only people that still live in this way are the Lapps in the extreme north of Scandinavia, who follow the reindeer as they did during the Ice Age. There are 30,000 people and 300,000 reindeer, and their way of life is coming to an end even now as we watch it. The herds go on their own migration across the fjords from one icy pasture of lichen to another, and the Lapps go with them. But the Lapps are not herdsmen. They do not control the reindeer. They have not domesticated it. They simply move where the herds move. The Lapps have some of the traditional inventions for controlling single animals that other cultures also discovered. For example, they make some males manageable as draft animals by castrating them. It's a strange relation. The Lapps are entirely dependent on the reindeer. They eat the meat, a pound a head each, every day. They use the sinews and fur and hides and bones. They drink the milk. They even use the antlers. And yet the Lapps are freer than the reindeer because their mode of life is a cultural adaptation and not a biological one. The adaptation that the Lapps have made, the transhuman's life on the move in a landscape of ice, is a choice that they can change. It's not irreversible as biological mutations are. Making a shelter from reindeer hides is an adaptation that the Lapps can change tomorrow. Most of them are doing so now. But you cannot change the color of your skin. Why are the Lapps white? Man began with a dark skin. The sunlight makes vitamin D in his skin, and if he had been white in Africa, it would make too much. But in the north, man needs to let in all the sunlight there is to make enough vitamin D. And natural selection, therefore, favored those with whiter skins. The biological differences between different communities are on this modest scale. The Lapps have not lived by biological adaptation, but by invention, by the imaginative use of the reindeer's habits and all its products, by turning it into a draft animal, by artifacts and the sledge. Surviving in the ice did not depend on skin color. The Lapps have survived, man survived the ice ages by the master invention of all, fire. Fire is the symbol of the hearth, and from the time Homo sapiens began to leave the mark of his hand 30,000 years ago, the hearth was the cave. For at least 1 million years, man, in some recognizable form, lived as a forager and a hunter. We have almost no monuments of that immense period of prehistory, so much longer than any history that we record. Only at the end of that time, on the edge of the European ice sheet, we find, in caves like Altamira here and elsewhere in Spain and southern France, the record of what dominated the mind of man, the hunter. There we see what made his world and preoccupied him. Knowledge of the animal that he lived by and stalked. And yet when we reflect, what is remarkable is not that there are such few monuments, but that there are any at all. Man is a puny, slow, awkward, unarmed animal. He had to invent a pebble, a flint, a knife, a spear. But why to these scientific inventions, which were essential to his survival, did he from an early time add those arts that now astonish us? Decorations with animal shapes. Why, above all, did he come to caves like this, live in them, and then make paintings of animals not where he lived, but in places that were dark, secret, remote, hidden, inaccessible? The obvious thing to say is that in these places the animal was magical. But magic is a word which explains nothing. It says that man believed he had power, but what power? Here I can only give you my personal view. I think that the power that we see expressed here for the first time is the power of the forward-looking imagination. In these paintings, the hunter was made familiar with dangers which he knew he had to face, but to which he had not yet come. When the hunters were brought here into the secret dark, and the light was suddenly flashed on the pictures, he saw the bison as he would have to face him. He saw the running deer. He saw the turning boar. The moment of fear was made present to him. His spear arm flexed with an experience which he would have and which he needed not to be afraid of. We also look here through the telescope of the imagination. The imagination is a telescope in time. We are looking back at the experiences of the past. The men who made these paintings, the men who were present, looked through that telescope forward. They looked along the ascent of man, because what we call cultural evolution is essentially a constant growing and widening of the human imagination. The men who made the weapons and the men who made the paintings were doing the same thing, anticipating a future as only man can do, inferring what is to come from what is here. all over these caves, the print of the hand says that this is my mark. This is man.